Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your new, safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Although I am the last guy on planet Earth qualified to speak to as much, we'll talk about the hashtag freebritney. In more than one segment, we will stand over the grave of journalism, because journalism is dead. And yes, I believe in the Phoenix Suns. On to the main attraction.
Act 1. If you don't understand the law, you will become a victim of it. Part 2. The Britney Spears Clown Show.
One of my favorite South Park episodes is the Britney Spears episode, because you see that all of the people, even the townsfolk in South Park, but all of the people in Hollywood and all of the people in the music industry and all of her quote-unquote entourage, and even, yes, even her fans, they all are simply wearing her down. They're all simply using her for one purpose or another. The episode actually aired in 2008. I think the episode is well worth your watching. I really don't want to spoil the end, but like many child stars, it satirizes the rise and inevitable fall of someone that really has no ally on planet Earth when it comes to their health, welfare, and happiness. No one cared about Britney Spears. The episode, called Britney's New Look, is a spoof on the fact that she had that plea for help where she shaved her head, and instead, well, again, don't want to spoil the episode for you. Several of you out there are saying, I'm not going to look up this episode of South Park. I'd never watched South Park. I'm too good for it. And for that, you're an asshole. So I will go ahead then and spoil it. Britney's new look, rather than being one of shaving her head, is she takes a shotgun and blows half of her head off. Unfortunately, in the episode, the vacuum, the reality that is South Park, she doesn't die. And therefore, all of these leeches that she has surrounded herself with continue to push her to go out and perform, to go out and be seen in public, to be Britney Spears. I'm the last guy to know. I'm the last guy to be aware of the comings and goings of popular culture. And it only came to my attention, this hashtag, as it is referred to in the popular culture now. There is this hashtag, Free Britney, that was trending. Trending means that it is now popular amongst the users of social media for, 20, 30 minutes? Well, like a toxic pesticide that slowly leaches into the soil, that news finally reached my brain in order to infect it. And I was made aware of not only this emotional, even desperate testimony offered by Britney Spears in a court hearing in Los Angeles County recently, I was made aware of the public outcry of support for Britney Spears in this conservatorship that she is still under from 2008. Now, a lot of this media coverage is just very, very slightly going over the why. Why is Britney under this conservatorship? There is very sparse coverage of the fact that the girl was a train wreck in 2007 and 2008. But because the writers of South Park are brilliant, it mirrored the spoof episode whereby the girl was a train wreck because she was desperate. She didn't have a friend in the world. She felt like she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was abusing alcohol, drugs, and although there are no public proclamations of as much, it's very likely that there were some veiled suicide attempts in the mix. Sadly, the other popular culture icon that has a correlation to that Britney Spears episode is Kurt Cobain, who also went through a drug and alcohol addiction. A drug and alcohol addiction that could be qualified as not only a plea for help, but as veiled suicide attempts, or, according to some recent documentaries, not so veiled attempts at suicide. While it was nice to see this public outpouring of support, I found it curious and, if not wildly misdirected. After reviewing some of the limited articles that one can find that actually discuss the case of the conservatorship and what's going on, I found the entire hashtag to be like a politician's thoughts and prayers. Yeah, I saw something tragic happened. Yeah, I'm really not going to do anything about it. So yeah, I'll just publicly express some sort of sympathy, and yeah, then I'll just go on living my life. But oh, how wrong I was. Human beings that clearly have nothing better to do with their lives actually went out into the streets in numerous places and began to protest. Now, when you see clips of this, it's always laughable because if you had a wide shot of how many people were actually protesting, it would probably be, 30, 20, maybe 10 people? But the very notion that someone actually went out of their home and was going to organize with another human being, if not but one, dear listener, it's still comical, that they were going to organize in order to march in protest of Britney being under a conservatorship. Wow. Just wow. Why? Because if you don't understand the law, you will become a victim of it. It turns out that many of these protests were associated around the belief that somehow Britney Spears was denied a motion to end the conservatorship. That Britney had made this emotional, this desperate plea to the court, and that within a week or two of having done so, had been denied the opportunity to get out from under this albatross, this abuse that constitutes a conservatorship and manipulation by her father. It was just too much for them. Although not front and center, as the media never really presents a lot of information front and center, a lot of facts, a lot of substance. It turns out that the judge in that case ruled on a motion that was before that court from 2020. And that motion before the court from 2020 involved Britney removing her father from the conservatorship. The judge appointed a different co-conservator and denied the motion to remove Britney's father from the conservatorship. Now let's start there. If you pay attention, dear listener, you will see it over and over and over again. A complete and total misunderstanding of how the courts actually operate. As potential litigants in a court, you should take note of the fact that a motion was actually filed with a court in the year 2020, and the judge did not rule on it until July of 2021. Throw your little tantrum wherever you are, dear listener. Throw your little tantrum. But understand, this is standard. This is par for the course. Although COVID has complicated things because of the stays in a number of states regarding judicial proceedings, the fact that courts were closed for a long time, although it's somewhat complicated by COVID, the wheels of justice move slowly. If you have the misfortune of being involved in civil litigation in any capacity, you must get mentally, physically in tune with the fact that everything is going to take a long time. There is no hammer of justice. There is no great scale of equity. As I have tried to educate you, dear listener, the courts are simply a place where disputes are arbitrated. You want truth? You want justice? The Bible awaits. The Quran awaits. The Torah awaits. You aren't going to find truth and justice in a court of law. You want a governmental agency that takes longer to process anything than the Department of Motor Vehicles? Welcome to a court of law. So those that are young and waiting to throw a tantrum, going out and protesting in the streets because they believe that Britney is still under this yoke of this conservatorship is laughable. The ruling that was issued by the court was for a motion filed a year prior. But dear listener, that's not even the funniest part. Look at the outpouring of public support in light of Britney's revelation about what's going on under this conservatorship. This has clearly been going on for years. Britney Spears was so upset about it that she went to the length of hiring attorneys who filed a petition to have her father removed from the conservatorship last year. Now, California, it's a unique state. It has all sorts of nuances in its law. With but a rudimentary understanding of a conservatorship, I thought to myself, here's a 39-year-old woman who's been going through the machinations of this court process for a year, trying to fight the named conservator to her conservatorship under the auspice that she doesn't believe that it's fair, that she doesn't believe that it's necessary. Why doesn't she just file a petition to terminate the conservatorship? While recording this very segment, an article drops where Britney publicly expresses her disappointment that no one's filed a petition to end her conservatorship, and she wasn't even aware that she had the right to file a petition to end her conservatorship. Harken back, dear listener. Harken back to the South Park episode. This girl doesn't appear to have an ally on planet Earth. And although you may have some big-name personalities offering again their thoughts and prayers, I can't believe that any of them were truly aware that she was still under this conservatorship and not also aware of how unhappy she was, of how manipulated she was. Aren't these stars, aren't these big-name personalities capable of calling some of their closest confidants, some of their closest legal allies, and saying, what can we do to help this poor girl? That's when it struck me. These people really are offering thoughts and prayers. They may agree that it's a tragedy. They may not like what's happening, but they're not going to do anything about it. And once they've offered those thoughts and prayers, they're going to move on to the next thing. I'm sorry, Britney. I'm sorry that some of your greatest allies on planet Earth are a few dimwits that are willing to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to march outside of an LA County courthouse in order to hashtag free you.
Act 2 Journalism is Dead Part 1. Capitol Hill Beat reporters.
Vice News recently ran a story about the trauma and what we all refer to now as post-traumatic stress disorder concerning being present at the Capitol Hill riot, at the insurrection, as some people have called it, on January 6th. One of the most overused terms today, besides love, is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Like the term love, it's often misused and misapplied. I can't go any further in this story without actually commenting on Vice News. When Vice News was launched back in 2013, of course I was suspicious, but I quickly came to look at Vice News as a very interesting, a very progressive alternative media outlet. Vice was doing stories that no one else would cover and was actually doing stories with depth, with substance, with journalists who were taking risks. That actually brought the outlet some notoriety, attention, and of course they wanted to elevate their market presence. In 2016, they hired some guy from Bloomberg News who I believe immediately began to fire everyone that had created what was a respectable journalistic outlet and replaced it with the kind of people who were doing the type of stories that you would see in a Bloomberg News, in a New York Times. That's right. You get your sensationalism and you get your human interest. Yellow journalism at its finest. So once I see that the outlet for any news story is Vice, I know what I'm going to get. As I've said before in this very podcast, the analogy that I used, I don't walk into McDonald's and expect to get a T-bone steak. I wouldn't dare pass by a Jack in the Box and think I can go in there and get a creme brulee. So Vice News does one of the most laughable puff pieces I've ever seen, specific to different beat reporters, people who had been working the Capitol Hill beat for, some of them, decades, and the trauma that they've experienced because they were present during what you could call either a protest or riot, or some have called an insurrection. There are anecdotes in this story whereby a reporter calls Capitol Hill their girlfriend and how marred they are now in their relationship with this quote-unquote girlfriend, given what happened on January 6th. There are reporters who, by their own admission, can no longer present at the Capitol building in light of all the trauma that they've suffered. Good Christ, what pussies. What pussies. Not 15, 20 years ago, you had journalists from all sorts of different mediums, whether it be print or television or even the internet, going into war zones in Iraq, in Afghanistan, covering our troops, covering what the media let be labeled the war on terror. This is a journalistic tradition that goes all the way back to, at least in this country, the Civil War. Here, you have a bunch of jackasses that just can't help to make themselves part of the story. Here, you have a bunch of news actors and news actresses that once the attention has moved far away from the scope of what they do, they can't help but try and draw that attention back to them. What actually happened at Capitol Hill on January 6th? Well, that's no longer the story. The story is what happened to me. It is yellow journalism at its finest. It is sensationalism and it is human interest all wrapped up into a basic, myopic, simple story about very, very shallow people. This is a group of people that are selfishly trying to justify their own existence, given what is particularly their own failure in communicating what actually went on and identifying what actually went on at these protests, if you want to call them that, at these riots, if you want to call them that, at this insurrection, if you want to call it that occurred at the Capitol on January 6th. It is almost as if it is an excuse for a total and utter failure at any journalistic instinct to find out what actually happened on January 6th. The reason being, I'm too traumatized. Some of the comments that I've seen on the internet specific to this story summarize this perfectly. Comments such as, "You're so brave and courageous in light of all the journalists that lost their lives during the January 6th riot. You're so brave and courageous given all of the information that you've gleaned from what really happened from those riots, from that protest." The one I like the most, though, was basically summarizing how I feel about the media and journalism in 21st century America, particularly those that are covering politics, particularly those so-called journalists, these news actors, these news actresses that are covering Capitol Hill. You weren't providing any substantive information before the riot, so there's no reason why we should expect you to provide any substantive information after the riot. I think this really is a reflection, and we as a people need to see it. I think this is really a reflection of the type of people that are drawn to, that would gravitate towards a beat, as it is referred to in journalism, a beat that is the covering of politics, of politicians, of the comings and goings at the Capitol. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's the Hollywood beat for dorks. For decades, the Hollywood beat was simply mirroring or parroting whatever the studios wanted you to say so you could get access to the stars so that you could then have interviews with the stars, promote your own name through the fame of these movie stars. The Capitol Hill beat is no different. You want access to the politicians so that maybe you can ghostwrite one of their books, or you can co-author a book, or you can do a biography about one of them. The news actor, the news actress wants to ride on the coattail of the fame of these politicians so that they can then promote their own interests. Hollywood for dorks. So the beat reporter on Capitol Hill beat is really not that much different from the politicians that they cover. Just like those politicians, these beat reporters are much easier to consume. These news actors and news actresses are much easier to consume in these 15, 30, 60, sometimes 120-second segments. Once the spotlight turns from them and they try to get the spotlight back, once they try to actually show who they really are in order to draw more attention to themselves, we determine very quickly, and properly so, that we don't like them, that they are not likable people. I've stated it here before on this podcast. Politicians are a necessary evil. Nobody wants to really do that job. And the type of people that want to do that job, you have to think about, what are they missing? What is this emptiness in their life that they would go through everything that they have to go through in order to become a state elected official, a federal elected official? The sacrifices that they demand of their family, of their friends. I see the same thing in these so-called beat journalists at Capitol Hill. What are they missing? What is this emptiness that they have that they would sycophantically chase after these politicians, not ever trying to address anything of substance, but currying favor just to promote their own self-image? And then in light of what happened on January 6th, trying to twist that into what? An opportunity. Another opportunity to make themselves the center of the story. The reason why there is such distrust of the media, the reason why there are so many new media alternatives, so many new media outlets, is that because journalism, specific to the mainstream media, is dead. That sorry-ass Vice piece is just a testament to as much. Journalism only exists insofar as there are journalists. Those that are actually in the practice of journalism. Just because you get a job as a beat reporter on any beat, that does not make you a journalist. In this right, I'm very proud of the American people in particular, because more and more of them are moving away from the mainstream media because they understand they're not going to get a T-bone steak at McDonald's.
Act 3, Sports Interlude. I believe in the Phoenix Suns.
As many a listener knows, I am a resident of the Valley of the Sun. During the NBA Finals, you could walk into a gas station and there's a TV behind the counter, no more than 18 inches, playing the Suns game, and there'd be 25 people gathered around hanging on every word. At publishing of this very podcast episode, the Phoenix Suns are up 2-0 against the Milwaukee Bucks in the National Basketball Association Finals, the championship. Phoenix won the first two games in Phoenix, at home, and although that's very encouraging, of course, many a pundit will tell you the series does not start until someone loses on home court. This is very true in light of the fact that Milwaukee went to New Jersey and lost their first two games, and then came back and won that series, having won the next two games at home. So Game 3 of the series between the Phoenix Suns and the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA Championship will very likely be not only the most exciting game, but the deciding game. If the Suns can win that game, I can't see the Bucks coming back. But if the Bucks win that game, it's a series, because they already have confidence playing at home, and all they need to do is get that one win under their belt, and they will begin to believe again. Although I want to believe that the Suns are going to win that game running away, Game 3 will most likely be not only the most contested, the most competitive, but the closest game between the two teams. Phoenix has injuries, their depth is depleted at center, and potentially at power forward. The backcourt of the Bucks has played terrible, and specific to Game 2, they were only down 5 at one point in the fourth quarter. If they were getting any production out of their backcourt, I'm sure they're saying in that locker room, I'm sure they're saying in their practice in Milwaukee, we could have won that game. We can easily win this game in Milwaukee, Game 3, if we play well. Or as athletes always like to say, if we play up to our potential. If Game 3 mirrors Game 1 and 2 and Phoenix is able to continue to shoot hot from all over the court and get that double-digit lead in the third and particularly the fourth quarter, it's a wrap, folks. I do want to comment, though, on the televised broadcast of the two games in Phoenix, particularly Game 2. As someone living in the Valley of the Sun, although not a native Phoenician, I was laughably surprised at, let's just say, the caliber of person being frequented during the close-ups of the crowd. Because I'm the last to know, Evidently, I wasn't the only one to take notice of this. The internets were exploding in real time with, you guessed it, the meme. That arena was packed, so there were clearly a number of people that they could have focused on throughout the course of a broadcast, and yet it seemed that they kept going to particular sections and focusing on particular people. I think I've said this before on the podcast, and it's a quote that's attributable to Napoleon, although he probably stole it from somebody else because he was the grandiose self-promoter. Never attribute to malice what incompetence will explain. I certainly can't attribute to the broadcasting team any motive or any narrative that they were trying to work in focusing on but a limited section of fans in the arena, but it sure seemed curious to me. The unintentional comedy, though, was quite nice. The internets rarely need fodder, material, to create the memes, but certainly they got some in Game 2 of the NBA Finals. As a minor subtext to the broadcast, I'm interested to see what happens when they do the same panorama in Milwaukee for Game 3. If they go through and have section after section of beautiful people, like they were panning over courtside seats in Los Angeles, something's up.
Act 4 Journalism is Dead. Part 2 The Tucker Carlson Paradox.
2 weeks ago, episode 19 to be precise, I did a segment on Tucker Carlson and on Rachel Maddow, specific to cable news and journalism. Basically, the fact that both Tucker Carlson, through attorneys, Rachel Maddow, through attorneys, Fox, through attorneys, NBC, through attorneys, had admitted in defamation claims against the network, against these on-air personalities, that these are not journalists. Let me repeat, these are not journalists. These are infotainers. These on-air personalities are infotainers. They are not journalists. They cannot be held to the standards of journalists. No reasonable person takes what they are saying as the truth or for the truth of the matter asserted. This legal argument convinced the courts, and therefore Rachel Maddow, NBC, Tucker Carlson, Fox, were not held liable for any defamation, for any slander. The crux of that piece was good. These folks finally admit that they are nothing more than infotainers. They don't have anything to do with journalism, and that the public at large, any reasonable person, should not take anything that they say as the truth or take it for the truth of the matter asserted. That was 2 weeks ago. This week, Tucker Carlson came out and said that a journalist had contacted him privately and told him that not only was the NSA spying on him, but was leaking his emails to select journalists in the community for publication. In clip after clip, Carlson expresses his outrage not only that the NSA is spying on him, but that his First Amendment rights are being trampled on by the government, by Big Brother. Does not the government, does not Big Brother respect the rights under the First Amendment of journalists to contact sources, to conduct investigations outside of interference from the government? Without thought, without the blink of an eye, social media, cable news, even traditional news outlets begin debating as much. No question whatsoever about the fact that in legal pleadings within the last 12 to 18 months, Tucker Carlson has admitted numerous times to not being a journalist. He could not be a journalist because if he was, then he may be held to a standard under which he could be liable for defamation, liable for slander, liable for libel. Fortunately, for both Fox and for him, Tucker Carlson that is, he's an infotainer. And any reasonable person knows as much, and therefore they don't take the things that he asserts as true, or they don't take them for the truth of the matter asserted. I've had a difficult time watching this farce play out with people who see it as no more of an opportunity to, again, push their own agenda. And I'm truly not sure whether or not I'm more upset with the courts or with Fox and Tucker Carlson. When I look at someone like Tucker Carlson, if he can go into court and make a representation to the effect of I'm just an infotainer, so don't hold me liable for the things that I say and do, if you can find a judge who will buy that argument, and then you can turn around and argue to the public, argue to your viewers, argue to the government itself. I am a journalist, and therefore I have rights and protections under the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America. That makes you brilliant. As you have heard numerous times on this podcast, dear listener, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. There is no conspiracy. The conspiracy that exists is inside of you. No one is being duped or lied to. The truth of the matter is plainly set before you, time and time again. Carlson and Fox use an argument that absolves them from liability in a civil case, and then practically in the same breath make an argument completely contrary to as much so that they have the protections afforded to journalists under the First Amendment. This very scenario sums up the discord that we have in modern life, in modern government. The only things that are true are the things that we say are true on the days that we say that they are true. The earth rotates around the sun, a day flips off the calendar, and we start all over again, from scratch. Outside of the paradox, that is, Tucker Carlson and Fox simultaneously claiming that Carlson is both an infotainer and a journalist, is the underlying issue with the NSA. One of the most interesting elements of this story concerns the fact that there are significant liberal media outlets. And when I say liberal, I mean with that big L. I mean with this modern, woke, liberal moniker. This liberal media that would question whether or not the NSA would in fact even spy on someone like Tucker Carlson. Whether or not, in fact, it's true. When Edward Snowden came out and revealed that, in fact, it is true, the NSA is spying on millions and millions and millions of Americans every year and using but the lowest of thresholds in order to do so, both big L liberals and little L liberals celebrated the man. What Carlson is claiming is no different than what Snowden told us 8-9 years ago. The NSA spies on Americans. It opens up their emails all the time. All it does is make an excuse as to the nature of whether or not the person that they're spying on is quote-unquote a target. The NSA simply says this person is not a target. But what Snowden revealed was all you have to do is have some kind of contact with someone that not only is not a target themselves, but that may have communicated with the target at some point in time. It's the 8 degrees of Kevin Bacon game, except it's being played by a national security agency, and it's all your confidential information, confidential communications that are the fodder of the game. Do I believe that Tucker Carlson was contacted by a journalist? Yes. Do I believe that Tucker Carlson was contacted by a journalist that had been contacted by an NSA agent? Yes. Do I believe that Tucker Carlson was contacted by a journalist that had been contacted by an NSA agent who was trying to leak to that journalist emails from Tucker Carlson? Yes. Yes, I believe it all. Carlson himself said it was very likely tied to the fact that he was reaching out to people in Russia to try to coordinate an interview with the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. Although Carlson wants to feel special in this moment, he's not. And although Carlson wants us to feel outrage on his behalf, I personally, dear listener, do not. Carlson knew 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, that the NSA was spying on Americans. Harken back to my very first podcast, episode number 1, where I recited to you a poem by German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, First They Came. I'm sure over the weeks and months to follow, you're going to see clips of Carlson lambasting people who were giving the NSA grief over this broad, loosely regulated spying program. Well, Tucker, First, they came from somebody else, and you didn't care. And then they came for somebody else, and you still didn't care because they weren't coming for you. And then, finally, they came for you. And you looked around, and there was no one else left to defend you. It isn't important because now you're the target. It was important the day it started happening. That someone with such a media reach, that someone that has such a broad media personality did not realize as much, could not convey as much, may not even understand as much. Well, that, dear listener, is the reason why journalism is dead. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.